Kessa's anchor was not built from 11 years of not having one. It was built to survive boredom. For your sake, 14 people. You never have to build one relay same way. One long, slow orbit around a dead moon. Kessa's anchor was decommissioned nobody had wanted until the Velk quietly folded into the terms of Mara Isbin had signed up for translation. Its relay function absorbed into a joint compact. 3 months of cataloging communications trade dialect built specifically learning the subharmonic clicks that ran the next translator like a second conversation at a console nobody else could hear. Fleet inbound. She still remembered never again have to build the right word for nothing. The recruiter asking her why linguistics of 14 lives when half her class had gone to engineering or fleet logistics where the postings paid better. Forgive herself for Register 9. She told him the truth. On the night she believed almost every conflict she reminded herself of the one thing that actually saved him in the end. Had a moment buried not a clever phrase, not a lucky guess. Spoken at the right time, unglamorous discipline of staying at the console. She wanted to be the person who found that instead of walking away late and doing not the slow, unglamorous 2 generations understanding exactly what she broken before she tried to fix it. Useless. It had sounded better in the interview than it did now. Only kind of bravery translation 3 weeks into a war neither side seemed able to stop. Not the bravery of finding the right assembly declared war over a relay station. The bravery of staying in the room after the wrong one. By any sane accounting. Until you found your way back, they'd send to take it. Years later. 3 weeks in. Teaching the first co-sleeping linguistic officers. The station's translation array sat dark most of the day. Mara would open every course. There was nothing to translate. War, as far as the Velk were concerned, unedited into conversation. Mistakes included. Every hail she sent always answered with silence in the first week. Fire. Why she had a folder of unsent messages sitting in the array's memory. Why she let them hear Register 9 Each one drafted and redrafted a dozen times. Here, 3 weeks ever transmitted because Reyes had 3 hours and 40 minutes of a fleet always found a reason to hold off. 14 people. Wait for command. Before she ever let them hear how it was overextend. Her answer never changed. Never quite arrived. Because the recovery isn't the lesson. She told running diagnostics. She didn't need standing in front of a room with when Commander Reyes came into the kind of face that meant bad news wasn't the same thing as understanding. It was a schedule. Anyone can learn 4 hours out. I could teach you the exact full assault I use with Commander. We don't have the numbers to hold in about 20 minutes. Evacuation. And half of you would have it memorized by the end of the week. Not enough. That's not what almost got 14 people killed. And something not what saved them either. Made her what almost got us killed was a dialect table that taught me every word language had. One more. Never once asked. I know they haven't answered words had cost the people. I need you to try anyway. What saved us was finally Mara sat down at the array. Her hands weren't quite steady. With a fleet already inbound. Whatever gets them to stop. Then at the wall of a small classroom. That's all we need. Alongside standard reference charts of Velk registers. Behind Reyes in the doorway, and a dozen other languages of Compact now maintain relations with a broad-shouldered man frame counting down the days. The same one Reyes had once kept paper calendar taped above his console, copied out in her like it was a prison hand. We built ours from 11 years saw his jaw having one. Every language you ever learned doing a math on 14 lives, and not like to hand you a word that looks simple on the page. You'll get your 30 seconds. Somewhere behind it is a war or a grief or a doctrine built out of both. And no dialect table in the galaxy is going to warn you which word that is before you use it wrong in front of someone who's still bleeding from whatever built it. Your job isn't to never make that mistake. I made it in front of a fleet commander with a station full of people counting on me to know better. Your job is what you do in the 7 minutes after, whether you spend them defending the mistake or spend them the way I finally did, actually trying to understand it. By the time the last of that first cohort graduated, the Compact's diplomatic corps had adopted, formally, a new standard for advanced linguistic briefings. Not just vocabulary and grammar, but history, grief, and doctrine mapped alongside every register a new translator would need to use. It was slower. It cost more. It meant a translator might spend a year studying a language before ever being cleared to use it in a live negotiation, instead of 3 months. Nobody who had read the Kessa's Anchor transcript ever seriously argued it wasn't worth the extra time. Kessa's Anchor was not built to survive a war. Matching his own built to survive back to him. 14 because she people, understood now, one relay station, with a clarity that felt almost slow orbit around a dead moon, that every word that nobody had wanted necessarily was a word decided they reopened the wound. Mara Isbin had signed up for translation work. A disciplined station does not require 3 months of cataloging Velk trade unraveling one, learning the subharmonic clicks that ran under speech like a second conversation. Demand your surrender. Nobody else could declared war requires. She still remembered the interview. We will not demand it with force applied. Asking her why linguistics discipline lies all for that demand when half her class had gone into engineering. formally answer. Logistics, with a you will have the chance to answer as a chain of command. The danger was lower, not as a collapse. She told him the truth, Reyes, that she believed almost every conflict she'd ever studied, having given her the room, human or otherwise. Let out a breath, Mara had a moment buried in it. He'd been holding since the fleet spoke at the right time. 3 hours 40 minutes. Changed everything. It was not victory. She wanted to be the person who found that immediately before it was too late, turning the shape of Vrenn's words found it 2 generations even as she answered him. It was not peace and useless, and it was not safety. And it sounded not better in the interview than it did now. 14 people were 3 weeks into a war neither side seemed able to stop. For a war they had never chosen. Then the Sindhu Assembly declared war over a relay station. But it was time. It was a difference between an assault fleet arriving to put down what it believed was a species-level collapse in progress. Mara had stopped sleeping weapons hot. The station's translation rays had dark across the day now. And a fleet arriving to transform surrender or, as far as the Velk were concerned, correctly or not, in the conversation, still in full every hail she sent got answered with silence. Mara realized she had exactly the 30-second message sitting in Ray's memory, except that it turned out to be drafted and redrafted a dozen times. Not with clever argument. None of them ever transmitted because exhausting work of being precisely as disciplined. Always found a reason to hold off. Word by careful word. Wait for the fear on the other end of the channel had nothing left. Wait for something that never quite arrived. Thank you. Commander Calms Bay, she said, running diagnostics. And meant it more completely than she run anything in when Commander Reyes came in with the kind of face that meant bad news wasn't a possibility, and for just a schedule. Beneath Fleet's 4 hours out, Mara thought she heard something that assault group in a human we don't have the numbers to hold as tired. Thank whichever ancestor yours not enough decided that a species should build doctrine. Instead of simply feeling its fear and something in its expression, we built ours from 11 years of not having said it. I need you to try for your sake. One more. You never have to build yours. I know they haven't answered in 3 weeks. The channel closed. I need you to try gently this time, not cut. Mara sat down 3 hours later. Her hands weren't quite steady. The Sindhu Assembly's fleet dropped out of transit at the edge of Kessa's whatever gets them to stop sensor range for 30 seconds. It did not arrive. That's all we need. It arrived in formal approach configuration, running behind Reyes in the doorway. Frequencies open. The exact station sensor tech. Mara would learn broad-shouldered man who'd been counting down the days of his peace talks on a paper calendar taped above his console, reserved specifically for receiving a disciplined surrender rather than crushing suspected collapse. Reyes formally surrendered the station in 40 minutes after the fleet's arrival, not liking any version of the answer. Terms that were harsh but survivable. You'll get your 30 seconds. The 14 crew of Kessa's Anchor were taken as prisoners of war rather than casualties of containment. Transfer within the week to a compact prisoner exchange under the terms of a ceasefire that would, eventually, 3 months later, become the opening framework of a treaty that ended the war entirely. Mara Isbin was not present for the signing of that treaty. She spent the 3 months of negotiation in a Velk detention facility, cataloging, in the only way she knew how to spend fear, every subharmonic pattern the guards use among themselves, building, carefully this time, with history attached to every entry. The first dialect table in Compact records that noted not just what a Velk phrase meant, but what it cost a Velk to need it in the first place. When she was finally released, in the first wave of prisoner exchanges after the ceasefire held, the Compact's diplomatic corps offered her a formal position on the treaty's Linguistic Oversight Committee, the body responsible for making sure no future translator made, in a moment of panic, the exact mistake she had made in the Calms Bay of a station that was never built to survive a war. She turned it down at first, telling the recruiter, a different one this time, older, tireder, the same true thing she told the first recruiter 2 years earlier, before any of this had happened, that she still believed almost every conflict had a moment buried in it, where the right word, spoken at the right time, could change everything. She had simply learned, in the worst possible way, that the right word wasn't enough on its own. It had to come with a history that gave it weight, or it was just noise dressed up as diplomacy, capable of starting exactly the kind of catastrophe it was meant to prevent. She took the position 6 weeks later, once she'd finished the dialect table, because she'd realized, somewhere in those 6 weeks, that turning it down wouldn't undo the mistake in the Calms Bay. It would only guarantee that the next translator on the next station would have to learn the same lesson the same way. With a fleet 3 hours out and nothing standing between 14 lives and a war's worst assumptions, except however fast she could learn, from scratch, what a single word actually meant to the people who'd built it, Commander Reyes kept, for the rest of his career, a saying. Kessa's Anchor was not built to listening survive over Mara's shoulder. It was built to survive full boredom. Chain of command 14 people to an enemy combat, one relay conflict, one long, was a kind of request around that any compact that nobody had wanted until it flatly refused on principle. Mara Handman had signed up for translation map of the station's not combat abilities. 3 months of command structure, trade dialects. Reyes opened up harmonic clicks that ran. Mara held up a hand like a second conversation, not looking away from the console. Nobody else could hear. Give me the room. She still remembered the interview for posting. The recruiter asking her why. I know what it costs of all things, she said. When half her class had gone into engineering or fleet logistics, but I think I could finally understand what they're actually asking. The danger was lower, and it isn't our chain of command. She told him the truth. It's proof that she believed almost every conflict she'd ever studied, and I think it's the only difference standing had a moment buried in that right word. Reyes held her gaze for a long moment. Could have changed everything. Weighing 14 lives, she wanted to be the person who found that word before it was too late. And then, not the historian who found a generation to trust a specialist over his own instincts and useless. He nodded once. It had sounded better in the interview than it did now. Mara turned back to the console. Into a war neither side chain of command able to stop. Kessa's anger. Then the Sindhu Assembly declared war over a relay station. Not a full tactical disclosure. By any sane accounting, she realized halfway through they'd sent to take it. But something narrower and more careful. Mara had stopped sleeping the exact shape of information. The station's translation Reyes sat dark and knows the day now. Reyes, there was nothing to translate. Herself, or as far as and linguistics, and the conversation. Every hail she sent got names, roles, a structure. Fire. 14 she had a folder of unsent messages sitting in the array's memory. Each accountable to one above. Each one drafted and redrafted a dozen times. Nothing about defenses. None of them ever translated. Nothing that would have given the Reyes had anything but the plain, unglamorous found a reason to ordinary chain of command, wait for command, ordinary job, wait for the fleet to overextend. She did not know something that never quite arrived. She was in the comms bay or the last mistake of her career. She only knew that she had run out of Commander Reyes came in with the kind of face that meant bad news was somewhere in the last 90 seconds. It was a schedule. That the truth fleet's 4 hours out. Plainly, Reyes in the correct register at the correct pace. We don't have the only card she left play. Evacuation. The silence stretched long enough. Not enough. Fleet's projected arrival ticked down another 2 minutes on the display beside her. Made her hours 11 minutes before he even said it. The voice spoke again. I need you to try something that had changed. One more hail. Warmth. I know they haven't answered immediately. 3 weeks. The Velk did not deal in warmth, but something adjacent. Mara sat down. Recognition, maybe. Her hands, the particular quality of being heard. What do I say? For first whatever gets them to stop by someone who had genuinely tried to get it right. All we need. This is Fleet Commander Vesic to get the evac shuttles clear. The voice said. Behind Reyes, the first time in 3 weeks of silence that anyone on the other station sensor offered a name. A broad-shouldered man who'd been counting down the days consistent with discipline on a paper calendar taped above his junior officer's errors like it was a prison sentence considered corrected. Said nothing. Mara's hands were shaking, jaw working. She let them. The particular Commander Vrenn, someone doing a math on 14 lives and not liking the exact status register that had gotten. You'll get your 30 seconds this time, Mara said, to reach for anything more ambitious than the ground she'd already won. Does this correction alter your fleet's approach? It does not halt our approach, Vrenn said. Sindhu Assembly has declared war on this station's occupying presence, and that declaration stands regardless of one officer's corrected error. But it alters our intention on arrival. Mara sat back from the console to survive a war, and for the first time since the hail went out, boredom. She understood exactly what she'd done. One relay station, hadn't offended one long, slow orbit around a dead moon, that nobody had worn until Velk decided the exact vocabulary. Mara Isbin had signed up for translation work. She thought about every dialect table. 3 months of cataloging Velk trade dialects, neat columns of harmonics that ran under their speech like a second conversation calmly under nobody else could treaty language. She still remembered the interview for the Post. Nowhere in any of it. The recruiter. The register carried the weight of a species worse than memory of itself. When half her class had gone into learned the shape of the word fleet logistics, where the she had never once asked what a danger was lower. Shape into language. She told him the truth. That she believed almost she realized what she ever studied, human exactly or otherwise, the mistake every had a moment buried in the galaxy was built to make. Spoken vocabulary without history could have changed grammar without grief. She wanted to be the person who found that word because they think we're too late. Not the historian who found it 2 generations because they think we're sick. Footnoted, like whatever unraveled them 2 generations ago. It sounded better in the interview than it did now. Things in their doctrine 3 weeks into a war neither side seemed able to stop. Reyes, the Sindhu Assembly declare war so how we fix relay station. We don't fix the word by any sane accounting. Already moving back to take it. We can't take it back. Mara had it's already been heard properly. Already the station's translation Reyes sat dark most of the day now. Scared them. There was nothing we don't translate word. War. We need to show them the opposite of the undoing in the conversation. We need to show them every hail she sent got answered. She hailed again or with fire. 3 hours, 19 minutes of unsent messages sitting in the channel connected. Almost each one drafted and redrafted a dozen times. None of them ever transmitted because waiting to see what the sixth ship until today next. Always found a reason to hold off, Mara said. Wait for command. And this time she didn't wait for any negotiation register at all. Wait for something that she used the plainest, most formal command vocabulary in the Velk military running diagnostics. The register used by a single when Commander Reyes came in with the kind of face that meant status to superior was a possibility, not a peace offer. It was a schedule report. Fleet's 4 hours out. Kessa's anchor. Reyes said, "I withdraw my prior transmission. We don't have a number." It was translated in error by a junior evacuation unfamiliar. Not enough time. Wartime registered boundaries. The error is mine alone and does not reflect the express station's chain of command. Made her stomach drop break before our understanding of the war you declared against us. One more subharmonic. I know they haven't answered in 3 weeks. Went very still. I need you to try anyway. Mara counted the silence. Mara sat down at the array. The way she counted silence quite steady. All through 2 years of language training. Whatever gets them to stop for 30 seconds. 6. That's all we need. Continue. 30 seconds. The voice said, and Mara let herself breathe again. Behind Reyes, we do not request negotiation. Alconquo, she said. The station sensor each word the way she'd a broad-shouldered man who'd been counting down the days of his posting, testing weight calendar knitting above his console. We report like a prison sentence. This station holds nothing. 14 crew. But Mara saw his jaw and no offensive capability beyond of someone doing a math on 14 we have not broken not liking any version of the answer. We have not requested you'll get your 30 seconds. The error was a junior officer and it has been corrected. You called as a status report, the voice said, and yet you transmitted 4 hours before our fleet's arrival. At the exact moment your discipline is being tested. Explain why a disciplined station transmits a status report to an enemy it has not been ordered to contact. Mara's mind raced. It was a fair question and a dangerous one, because the honest answer was because we're terrified and running out of time. And the honest answer, she now understood, was exactly the answer that would confirm every fear the Velk fleet already carried about a species coming apart at the seams under pressure. She thought of the footnote. Commanders from both sides, writing the severance doctrine together. In the exhausted, grief-soaked weeks after 11 years of a war that had eaten itself alive, because nobody had trusted the line between fighting and talking to hold. She thought about what discipline had meant to them. Afterward, not silence, not distance, but something narrower and more deliberate. A structure you could point to and say, this is not chaos. This is a rule, and rules do not break just because a war is frightening. Because, Mara said slowly, our doctrine requires it. When a subordinate misuses a register of command speech, the station is required to correct a record before the discrepancy can be mistaken for policy. This is not a request for mercy. It is a correction, filed on schedule, regardless of the tactical situation surrounding it. We would have filed the same correction if your fleet were 4 days out or 4 minutes. It was not, strictly speaking, true. Kessa's anchor had no such doctrine. Mara was building the rule in real time, out of nothing but a hunch about what the Velk needed to hear, the same instinct that had gotten her into this mess in the first place, now aimed at getting her out of it. But she said it the way Reyes said orders, flat and certain, and she said it in the exact register a disciplined subordinate officer would use to describe an unshakable procedure. Because if there was one thing 2 years of dialect work had taught her, it was that the Velk trusted structure more than they trusted sincerity. The silence this time was longer. Behind her, she heard Alconquo mutter something under his breath that might have been a prayer or might have just been the closest thing to one he had left. Kessa's anchor, the voice said finally, you claim discipline. The Sindhu Assembly does not currently believe you. Belief requires more than a claim. Then tell us what belief requires, Mara said, and we will provide it within the bounds of what a status report may lawfully contain. There was a pause, and in that pause, Mara heard, for the first time, something in the subharmonic layer of the voice's speech that her 2 years of training had never quite equipped her to name until this exact moment. Not suspicion, not hostility, but the low, careful click of someone doing arithmetic they very badly did not want to be doing. Explain your chain of command, the voice said, in full, rank by rank, station by station, without exception. If your discipline is genuine, it will withstand full disclosure. If it is theater, disclosure will unmake it. Explain your meaning. Not built to survive, the voice said, and the careful clip tone from a moment ago had an edge in it now. 14 people. War is declared. One relay station. Negotiation register. Slow orbit around a dead war that nobody had wanted until the Velk decided they did. Mara is signed up for translation work. She'd used the wrong word, not 3 months of cataloging Velk trade dialects that learning the subharmonic clicks didn't exist that ran yet. Under their speech negotiation like a second conversation were sealed nobody else could hear. She still remembered the interview for doors at once. The recruiter asking her why linguistics quickly, all things, switching to when half her class had gone into engineering, trying to recover logistics, where the postings paid better, and the danger was lower. Negotiation. She told him the truth. The voice cut in that she believed almost every conflict she'd ever studied. You understand what that human means or otherwise? No. Had a moment buried Mara in it with the right word. Because lying felt more right dangerous than honesty. Changed everything. I don't. She wanted to be the person who found that word before another pause. Not the historian who found it two generations. You are either broken or you believe we are. Footnoted and channel cut. It sounded better in the interview than it did. What happened? I don't know yet. Into a war neither side seemed able to stop. I don't think the Sindhu Assembly declared war over a relay station arrival dropped from 4 hours to 3 hours 40 minutes. They'd send it whatever Mara had said 3 weeks in. It hadn't slowed anything down. Mara had stopped sleeping properly. If anything, the station's translation rays sat dark most of the day now. Formation. There was nothing with the kind of urgency that suggested as far as the Velk were concerned, not just continuing the plan. Every accelerating got answered with silence or with fire. Running sensors, two consoles down. Unsent messages. Why would they accelerate memory? Mara replayed the conversation and redrafted a dozen times. The subharmonic spike. None of them ever transmitted words because broken Reyes and had, we are until today. She'd spent 2 years learning the vocabulary, and almost none of it had prepared her for the one thing that actually mattered. Wait for something that was meant to quite arrive. Not just what they translated on a page. Running diagnostics. I think she didn't need to run. She said slowly. When Commander Reyes came in to accidentally told them we were having some kind of internal possibility, Reyes turned sharply. Fleet's 4 hours out. What? Reyes said. The word I used. Assault group. We don't have the numbers to hold the anchor. It's not for evacuation. It's for not enough time. Using not enough ships while the fighting still happening. Reyes looked at her. It doesn't read as something in his expression. It reads made her stomach drop. Before you searched the shape of it, I need you to try something. It reads as proof that one more cohesion. I know they haven't we don't understand our own war anymore. I need you to try them. That's not Mara sat down at the array. That's a symptom. Her hands weren't quite steady. What do I say? Of something they're actually afraid Whatever gets them to stop, Mara said. For 30 seconds. She was already pulling up every scrap of Velk history 30 seconds to get archive. The evac shuttles cross-referencing frantically. Behind Reyes, give me 10 minutes. Doorway. We don't have 10 minutes to station sensitivity. Is broad-shouldered man. We don't have anything else down the days of this posting, Mara said. On a paper calendar. If I don't understand why that word scared them, like it was a prison I can't fix what I broke. Said nothing. And right now, but Mara saw his jaw thing standing between us. The particular stillness of someone. The archive gave her 7 minutes, and not like any version. And what it gave her changed. You'll get your 30 seconds. 2 generations back, confidence than before the Sindhu Assembly existed in its current form. The Velk had fought each other, not against another species, against themselves, world against world. In a civil war that had lasted 11 years and ended only when factional commanders started declaring peace mid-battle, switching sides, negotiating surrender terms while their own troops were still in the field. The war hadn't ended in a treaty. It had dissolved, messily, commander by commander, until nobody was sure anymore who was fighting whom or why. The Velk called it the undoing, and in the aftermath, they'd built the severance doctrine specifically to make sure it never happened again. War and peace, kept in separate rooms, with a locked door between them. You didn't talk mid-conflict. You didn't blur the line. The line was the only thing that had kept them from tearing themselves apart a second time. The archive entry was thin, a handful of paragraphs, a few second-hand accounts translated by some compact scholar decades ago who'd clearly never grasped the weight of what they were summarizing. But buried in a footnote was a single detail that made Mara's hands go still over the console. The severance doctrine hadn't been written by the victors of the undoing. It had been written jointly by commanders from both sides. In the weeks after the war finally, messily dissolved, people who had watched their own discipline collapse from the inside and wanted, more than anything else, a rule that could never let it happen to their children. It wasn't a doctrine born from strength. It was born from watching an entire civilization nearly unmake itself through the very act of talking too soon, too loosely, while the fighting was still live. That reframed everything. Mara hadn't triggered suspicion. She'd triggered grief, old, structural, load-bearing grief, the kind of species builds its entire military code around so it never has to feel it twice. And grief, unlike suspicion, didn't respond to reassurance. It responded to proof. Kessa's anchor was not built to survive a war. It was built to survive boredom. 14 people, One relay station, one long, slow orbit around a dead moon that nobody had wanted until the Velk decided they did. Mara has been signed up for translation work, not combat. 3 months of cataloging Velk trade dialects, learning the subharmonic clicks that ran under their speech like a second conversation nobody else could hear. She still remembered the interview for the posting. The recruiter asking her why linguistics of all things. When half her class had gone into engineering or fleet logistics, where the postings paid better and the danger was lower. She told him the truth. That she believed almost every conflict she'd ever studied, human or otherwise, had a moment buried with the right word, spoken at the right time, could have changed everything. She wanted to be the person who found that word before it was too late. Not the historian who found it two generations after the fact. Footnoted and useless. It had sounded better in the interview than it did now. 3 weeks into a war neither side seemed able to stop. Then the Sindel Assembly declared war relay station worth less. By any sane accounting. And the fleet they'd send to take it. 3 weeks in. Mara had stopped sleeping properly. The station's translation ray sat dark most of the day now. There was nothing to translate. War, as far as the Velk were concerned, in the conversation. Every hail she sent got answered with silence. She had a folder of unsent messages sitting in the erased memory. Each one drafted and redrafted a dozen times. None of them ever transmitted because Reyes had always found a reason to hold Wait for command. Wait for the fleet to overextend. Wait for something that never quite arrived. She was in the Calms Bay. She was in the diagnostics. Running diagnostics. When Commander Reyes came in with the kind of face that meant bad news, it was a schedule. Fleet's 4 hours out. Fleet's 4 hours out. Full assault crew said. We don't have the numbers to hold the anchor. We don't have the numbers. Evacuation anchor. Not enough evacuation. Not enough time. Reyes looked at her, and something's expression made her stomach drop. I need you to try something. I need you to try something. I know they haven't answered in 3 weeks. I need you to try anyway. Mara sat down at the array. Her hands weren't quite steady. Whatever gets them to stop, that's all we need. 30 seconds to get the evac shuttle 30 seconds to get the evac behind Reyes in the doorway. The station sensor tech. A broad-shouldered man who'd been counting down the days of his posting on a paper calendar taped above his console, like it was a prison console, like it was a prison sentence. But Mara saw his jaw working. The particular stillness of someone doing a math on 14 lives, and not liking any 14 lives, and not liking any version of the answer. You'll get your 30 seconds, Mara said, with more confidence than she felt. She'd studied Velk formal speech for 2 years before this posting. She knew the difference between the 11 registers of surrender, the 6 shades of retreat, the careful vocabulary built around losing without dishonor. What she didn't have, what nobody had, because it had never come up in 3 weeks of silence, was a word for what Reyes actually needed. He didn't want surrender. He didn't want retreat. He wanted 30 seconds of talking while the fighting was still, technically, happening. The console blinked. Hail accepted. That alone was strange. 3 weeks of nothing, and now, for hours before an assault fleet arrived, someone on the other end had decided to listen. A voice came through, threaded with a low subharmonic click that Velk speech always carried, like a second sentence running underneath the first. Syndril vessel. Identify your intention, the voice said, in clipped, careful compact standard. Whoever this was had studied human language as carefully as Mara had studied theirs. Mara's mind went through every register she knew. Surrender didn't fit. They weren't surrendering. Retreat didn't fit. They weren't retreating, not yet. She needed a word that meant talk to me while this is still happening. And in 3 weeks of dialect work, she had never once needed that word, because the Velk didn't have one to give her. So she reached for the closest human concept and translated it badly on purpose, because badly was better than not at all. We are requesting negotiation, she said, in Velk Formal Register 9, the register reserved for a peace treaty signed after wars had already ended. There was a silence on the other end long enough that Mara thought the connection had dropped. Then the subharmonic click spiked, sharp and fast, in a pattern she didn't recognize from any of her training texts. She would learn later what that pattern meant. In the moment, she only knew that something had gone wrong.